All right. I think that's everything that's coming up and everything that is currently in here. Um, as we play around with this, you'll get to see the archers, and if the archers do not come in quickly enough, I'll adjust the code so you can see it. But speaking of the code, why don't we take a look at some of the code that I want people to investigate this week. And the first code we're going to examine, let me put this back down to level 1. Let's restart the game. And let me talk to what we're seeing here. I'll pause it. So what we see here is one of the ground styles. It's maybe a little bit hard to see in the video. Let me see what I see over here on the... Yeah, you can see it. So it's a repeating pattern of textures that are seamless, and so they produce a nice ground pattern. And what you've got going on here is I've selected random tiles from within a very small set of tiles in this group, which is ground 3, I think. I'll check in a moment. And these are all guaranteed to be seamless with each other regardless of which ones you select. In other words, you could choose texture 1, texture 3, texture 2, texture 3, and they would be guaranteed to be seamless, and yet what you get is this nice organic pseudo-random looking background. One of the things you see a lot in the tiled games that use seamless textures is that the artist who has done them or the programmer who is using them is not, how do I put it? They are not experienced enough, or they don't care for whatever reason, and they don't lay out the tiles in such a way that it looks nice. What you get is a lot of banding and repeated artifacts. In fact, I think there is one texture in here that does that regardless. Let me see if I can find it. No. Give me just a moment.
But it's interesting to see how easy it is to swap background.
Yeah, so what you're seeing here is in Game Lua, there's a section where it says Draw Background. And I'll just explain what this line is. This line is telling the background maker, use the S2 group. There are this many different groups of associated textures. Blob 0, Blob 1, Dirt 0 through 3, Grass 0 through 3, Plant 0, Plant 1, Ramp 0, and then Stone 0 through Stone 5. As shorthand, I've given them just tiny short notation B0, B1. And then, in fact, it's worth noting that although I use these together, I use them alone. I only use the blobs by themselves. I only use Grass 0 by itself. Many of these can actually be combined, but that is another level on top of the complexity which I was trying to solve that I was unable to get to in the time that I had available to me. It wasn't worth it for this example to try to solve this complexity. And I'll show you the document in a moment that you need to look at. If you're watching this video and you feel like taking a stab at improving this code, then you'll want to read the document first. Okay, so what I was saying here is this shorthand notation off to the right for people who want to experiment is saying you could put in B0 through B1, D0 through D3. So in other words, D2 would be a possibility out of that set. And then you would reload it, and you would get D2. So D2 is not that beautiful looking to me. G0 through G3, P0, P1, R0, that's only one in that set, and then Stone, which has the most, S0 through S5. Let's see. Let's go back to the one I liked previously, P2. All right, so I'm not going to be able to demonstrate the banding here, but banding, you know it when you see it. Basically, it's a repeated pattern where you see some kind of artifact. For example, let's call this little bit of stone here an artifact, and you just see it repeated over and over and over. And it looks bad. The eye picks this up. It's the kind of thing that
it's an obvious repeating pattern that distracts.
It's kind of ugly. It's a sign that people are either new to what they're doing. I mean, even here, there's a little bit of repeating pattern. You can kind of see it. I mean, this is clearly repeating in several places, but because of its random organic layout, which is changed every time, let me go with a different texture here. Here's a good one that demonstrates it. So you got like this little layout. If you pay attention to this part here, the next time I load it, I won't move the cursor. Now it's changed. So basically, I am laying out random tiles based on very simple rules that I have come up with, which are derivatives of very complicated rules in the document. Let's look at that briefly, and then I'll show you the code. The images folder has a subfolder called Lost Garden, and below that ground. And in here you will see 253 different textures for the different ground styles. And let me find it. Here it is. There's a PDF document in here called Layout Rules. If we open Layout Rules, and I bring it over onto the screen so you can see it, you'll see that it elaborates on the names of the texture files. And the names of the texture files have components, where AA is the first two letters, BB is the second two letters, C is the next one, and then it tells you, in short, what these are. So AA is the group type, and that would be familiar as D3, D3, G0, basically those subsets that I was just using to select them. And then within that, transition twos. Now transition twos, at first you, let's see. Transition two is a rule that tells you what other group type you can transition to from this. So if, for example, we're in B0, this group type may be able to transition to G0 or X0 or whatever the subtype is. This is the part where I was saying you actually have the ability to transition from one style of texture to another style of texture, but you got to pay attention to the naming rules. Now, I did not incorporate this in my selection logic because it was just too much work for me. But I think that somebody maybe a little more clever or with a little more time on their hands than I would be able to do this, because once you open up the door to transitioning from one style of texture to another style, you're going to get a much more rich background. In essence, what has occurred here, long story short, is that after I put in all the rules to deal with as many of these factors that I could, I found that in the best of cases, I only had 4 textures that I could switch between out of a group that might have 50 textures. And the reason is because this next rule, tile type, is very limiting without the ability to transition from one ground style to another ground style or texture style. Now, in short, what this tile type thing is telling you is if you are moving to the right and you've got a texture that has a tile type A, then you look at these two values right here, 0, 1 on the right edge. And an A can align with an E, because an E starts with a 0, 1 on the left edge. A G starts with a, where's another one? An L. So this is a way of saying how can I move to the right, to the down, up, etc. And in short, as long as the 2 tile matches whatever direction you're coming from. So if you were moving up, then we were looking for a tile that had 0, 0 on the bottom, which would be C. So we could move up into a C, an F, or an M. And it's worth noting that the M's are the omnidirectional 0 tiles. Anything 0, this is sort of like the base tile.